After rescuing a billionaire's little girl, a homeless man spots a number inside her locket that connects to his buried past and threatens to upend the family that tried to buy his silence. Stay with me, because before this night ends, a piece of cold silver will say what no one else dared to. The light changed and didn't change, one of those New York intersections where taxis guessed the color and everyone else pretended they weren't guessing. Caleb Reed had learned to read it by the weight of noise, the way engines held breath, the jitter of a bike chain, the ripple humans make when a crowd senses danger. He moved before he knew why. The stroller had rolled, a small pink comet cutting away from a distracted nanny and straight into the road. Caleb lunged, boots slipping on salt-stiffened slush, palms burning as he caught the handle and jerked it back so hard it banged his knees. The SUV's horn hit a second later, a blast that rattled the metal ribs of the city. The girl inside the stroller had a ribbon in her hair and the solemn gaze of a small judge. She blinked once, as if deciding whether to cry, and then reached out, curious, to the frayed cuff of Caleb's coat. Her fingers found the loose thread and pinched it, smiling. He stood there, breathing in exhaust and steam from a corner pretzel cart, wool hat suddenly too tight on his head. The nanny, breathless, poured apologies that fell all over the sidewalk. People were filming. The SUV rolled past. A black sedan stopped. Two men in dark coats got out, and behind them stepped a woman whose heels made no sound on the wet concrete. "Are you okay?" she asked the girl, her voice a thin wire stretched over fear. The child, Nora, patted her mother's cheek and said, "He caught me." Caleb wanted to fade, the way you do when people with glossy hair and perfect teeth arrive, the way shadows do when money turns its face your way. But the woman's gaze landed on him and stayed. Up close, she had winter in her perfume, orange rind singed over a flame, and a silver locket at her throat. The same locket hung at Nora's neck, tiny, teardrop-shaped, glinting with a small engraved curve he couldn't quite make out. "Thank you," the woman said. "Please let us. Just come with us. We need to make sure she's okay." The men in dark coats were already creating a bubble around them, parting the sidewalk like stagehands. Caleb opened his mouth to refuse, because people like him complicated rooms like theirs, because hospital floors had a way of making him remember a hallway he'd spent too many nights in. But the girl had his thread and wouldn't let go, and the smell of burnt orange lifted something old and dull inside him, a drawer sticking open after years. The sedan's interior was warmer than it had any right to be. Leather, coffee, the high hum of money in motion. Caleb sank into the corner of the seat, conscious of damp denim and salt stains mapping his boots. Nora counted raindrops on the window with the absolute seriousness of 6-year-olds. The woman, Marina Vale, the driver said, like a plane announcing its destination, texted with the speed of someone brushing away a crisis before it hit the news. At the hospital, a pediatrician appeared out of nowhere, a man with perfect hair and an expensive watch. Nora got a sticker and a clean bill of health and a lollipop she did not eat. Marina didn't stop thanking Caleb, like she was afraid gratitude had a threshold and she might fall short. Another man joined them in a slate coat with the tired alertness of someone who sleeps in meetings. Ethan Vale, whose name everyone knows because it sits on buildings. He shook Caleb's hand precisely once, looked at his knuckles, looked away. "We'd like to show our appreciation," Ethan said, as if the words were a legal clause. "Come by for dinner tonight." Caleb thought of the church kitchen on 91st, where the soup ladle left crescents on his palm. He thought of the cardboard sign in his backpack, folded twice, the one that said, "Work for cash," and how the marker had bled when the snow touched it. He began to say no, but the doctor had left, and Nora was holding up her locket. "Want to see?" she asked him. "It's got a secret." He leaned down. The locket was cool against his skin when she pressed it into his hand. It opened with a tiny click to reveal a circle of paper, thin as breath, with 3 numbers written in blue. 629. He almost dropped it. The numbers pressed at the back of his eyes like a headache trying to bloom. He closed the locket gently and gave it back, hearing his own voice from far away say, "Pretty." The Vale townhouse on East 75th wore its warmth like a practiced smile. Doormen, lamps that glowed the color of tea, marble floors that made your footsteps behave. Caleb's coat disappeared into the hands of someone who called him sir without flinching. A fire snapped lazily in the library, sending up thin threads of smoke that tasted like cedar. On the mantel, a silver frame held a photo of Marina and Ethan with a newborn swaddled in hospital stripes, the same teardrop locket resting against the baby's cheek. If you notice the nick on the silver frame, keep it with you for one more breath. Sit, Marina said. And he did, on a couch that had never met dust. Nora settled beside him, as if she'd known him longer than the hour it had been, her head leaning into his arm with the trust that scares adults because we've forgotten how to do it. A housekeeper arrived with towels, a soft sweater, socks that felt like holding a cloud. Caleb's body, always braced for the next cold, began to warm in pieces he hadn't realized were numb. Ethan stood behind an armchair like he needed furniture between them. "We can offer you a position," he said, not bothering to pretend it wasn't the first time he'd said those words to solve a problem. "Facilities, grounds, we have properties. We could use someone who pays attention." Marina shot him a look, a quick silent syllable. "What my husband means," she said, "is that we want to help, not just write a check, if you're comfortable with that." Caleb pictured jobs he'd had and lost. A loading dock where his back learned the precise weight of regret. A hotel where white gloves tested surfaces he hadn't known could be judged. He pictured a woman whose laugh came in on the end of sentences, who used to peel oranges over the sink and set the rinds to dry on the radiator like little suns. The radiator popped and hissed. She had worn a cheap locket with a sticker inside that kept falling out. He had bought it with tip money from the hotel. He had never asked what the numbers meant. Dinner tasted like things he'd only ever smelled on other people's coats. Rosemary butter, the crisp sweetness of carrots that had never seen a can. Nora talked about a school play where she'd had to pretend to be a tree, and how being a tree is hard because you are supposed to be still, but also sway. Marina laughed the right amount, like someone who knows both joy and how cameras catch it. Ethan took a work call in the hall. Caleb chewed slowly, each bite both gift and test. After, Nora tugged him to the mantel to show him the photo. Up close, the nick on the frame wasn't a dent. It was a tiny notch, like a notch you'd make if you were marking something to be cut. The baby's face, Nora's face, before it knew itself, was turned toward the camera. Marina's hair in the picture looked softer, Ethan's eyes less armed. Caleb's finger hovered over the locket in the photo, the little teardrop shape, the curve of the engraving visible if you knew to look. "What are the numbers for?" he asked, keeping his voice casual, like asking the time. Nora whispered, conspiratorial, "It's a secret code. Mum says it's birthday math. 6, 2, 9. Marina had come up behind them without sound. "Rich houses teach you to walk like that." "It's nothing," she said quickly. "A family habit. Superstition, really." "Superstition," Ethan repeated as he re-entered, as if making it official. He poured something amber into a glass without looking. "Mr. Reed, we'd like to discuss the terms of helping you. Privately." Caleb lowered himself into the armchair they steered him toward. The leather sighed, accepting his weight as if it had been waiting. Ethan talked numbers with the flat ease of a man who makes them move. A stipend, a room, work that sounded like the absence of hunger. Marina's eyes kept flicking to the locket at Nora's throat, then to the photo, then away. The fire snapped, a soft, polite applause. Somewhere in the house, a door closed delicately. "Before anything," Caleb said, surprising himself, "the locket. Can I see it again?" Nora looked at her mother. Marina hesitated for a heartbeat too long, and then nodded. The chain slid across the child's skin with a silvery whisper. Caleb opened the locket. Thin paper, blue ink, 629. He felt the room tilt, the way subway cars do when they switch tracks under you. He reached into the inside pocket of the sweater they had given him, because he'd tucked it there, not trusting the world not to change, and found the plastic sleeve he'd carried for years, the one with an old emergency room wristband inside, and a corner torn from a form that had once had coffee spilled on it. The wristband's numbers were faded but legible, the ink gone to the color of rainwater. 629. He hadn't known he'd been waiting for this. He hadn't known he had been waiting at all until the two numbers, hers and his, sat together like magnets finally given permission. And when he looked up, Marina's hand had found the back of a chair, as if she'd needed something solid, and Ethan's glass had stopped halfway to his mouth, and the room that had been theirs a moment ago felt as though it had admitted someone it didn't expect to survive. Caleb closed his fingers around the plastic sleeve, and for the first time since the intersection, his heart broke a clean beat against his ribs as he realized he'd seen those numbers once before in this house. Ethan set his glass down without drinking, the ice ticking softly like a clock he wished he could stop. "What are you implying?" he asked, but the question landed too slowly, like it had been rehearsed upstairs and forgotten on the way down. "I'm not implying anything," Caleb said. I'm telling you, I've seen that number before, tonight and years ago. Marina's gaze moved between the wristband in his hand and Nora's locket. The fire deepened its glow, ember to ember, a hush of cedar and wool. Years ago, she repeated, as if tasting the calendar. Where? Caleb's tongue felt heavy with a memory he usually kept locked behind hunger and cold. Her corridor that never slept. The disinfectant sting that bloomed in your throat. A nurse humming off-key under her mask, while machines mapped the rhythm of panic. In that corridor, on a night that had swallowed his name and given him back a thinner one, a clerk had slid across a plastic bracelet printed with 629 and told him to sit. He sat until morning, turned him out into a snow that tasted of metal. And before that, this mattered now, he realized. He had once come to this house with a crew laying cable under the stairs. A door downstairs had been ajar. Inside, a safe panel gleamed in the wall behind a row of frames. A sticky note clung to its edge. 3 blue numbers. 6, 2, 9. Ethan's mouth tightened. Plenty of numbers look alike. Not when they keep finding you, Caleb said quietly. Enough, Ethan snapped, then smoothed the word like a crease in his tie. Nora needs to sleep. Nora had curled against Marina's side, thumb tucked under her jaw, the locket a small moon on her throat. Marina lifted her gently and handed her to the nanny, who appeared from the hallway as if the house had grown her. When they were alone again, Marina folded both hands, palms pressing as if in a silent prayer she'd be embarrassed to admit to. Mr. Reed, she said, we'd like to offer you a room at our guest cottage in Tarrytown. It's quiet, safer than where you've been. A job, as Ethan said, and something else. Her voice thinned. It would mean a great deal if this evening never became public. Ethan slid a folder across the table, its paper warm from his hand. A standard confidentiality agreement. No media, no social posts, no conversations with third parties regarding our home or our child. His smile chafed. You'd be surprised what people try. Caleb looked down at the printed clauses. The black type swam for a second, then settled. In the corner of one page, a watermark curved into a teardrop shape, ornamental, pretty. He could smell the citrus again, that singed orange, like peels pressed to a candle flame, the smell of a kitchen his mind refused to leave. If you noticed how that word changed the air, quiet, hold it for a breath, it comes back carved in metal when no one's listening. He remembered the shelter cot on 91st, the springs that complained even under his thin weight, the smell of damp socks, the way kindness there always arrived in paper bowls and left in whispers. If he took this room, it would mean heat at night, a lock that respected him, a door that didn't need his shoe to stay shut. He also knew what paper could do to a man. The last time he'd signed something, he hadn't read the part where his old apartment surrendered in legal language too cheerful to be honest. May I think? He asked. Of course, Marina said. But you can come tonight. The cottage is ready. We keep it for staff and family. She added the last word quickly as if worried it had escaped without permission. He went with the driver to fetch his backpack from the church basement. The city's night pressed against the windows, glass sweating under neon. He watched the cross streets turn into a black river of the FDR, then into the unused bones of the West Side Highway, then into the narrow, candlelit street where the church huddled, stone cold to the touch. He stepped into the basement and found his bunk already given to another man, a pair of boots standing like faithful dogs under the frame. He didn't take it back. He took only his pack, the folded sign, the plastic sleeve with the wristband, and the orange rind he'd kept because it had smelled like a memory he couldn't place until tonight. Back at the townhouse, Marina met him with a wool coat he could borrow, heavy and clean, the kind of fabric that made you stand up straighter. She wrapped a scarf once around his neck and tucked the end in like a small accidental habit. We'll drive up together in the morning, she said. For tonight, stay here, we have a spare room. Ethan disagreed with his jaw but not his words. Fine. They showed him a room that tasted of lavender and starch, sheets crisp as paper against his skin. The radiator hummed with old house pride. On the nightstand, someone had placed a glass of water, a book he didn't touch, and a silver-framed photo that matched the one on the mantel, except this frame's notch sat on the opposite side. He leaned closer. Not a dent, not random, a mark. A code, maybe, for sorting. He lay down and closed his eyes. The city's engines softened into a low animal breathing. When sleep came, it broke into him like a tide, carrying the hospital corridor on its back. He woke to a whisper and the soft scrape of paper. Marina stood in the doorway, robe tied, hair loosened by the kind of night that pulls at you whether you want it to or not. She held an envelope, cream with a slight tooth. "Ethan thinks you'll sign tomorrow," she said, keeping her voice thin so it wouldn't wake the house. "He thinks offering you safety is the same as offering you silence. Maybe they're the same thing. Maybe not." "I'm not looking to hurt your family," Caleb said. "But I need to know why the number follows me." Marina looked at the envelope as if it might open its mouth and answer. "Do you believe in superstition?" she asked. "In numbers, meaning things?" "I believe in what they stick to." She handed him the envelope. Inside lay a photocopy of a page from a ledger, the kind with green lines and a red margin, the paper smelling faintly of dust and lemon oil from whatever drawer it lived in. At the top, a heading, Vale Foundation, Infant Care Allocations, a list of dates and amounts. Next to June 29th, 7 years ago, a larger sum than the others, underlined twice. Initials followed by a single word. Mercy. "Hospital?" he asked. She nodded. Mercy General. His stomach folded on itself. Mercy General was where the bracelet had been clamped to his wrist, where the nurse had hummed, where a social worker with careful eyes had told him he could come back when he had someone to call. He had never had someone to call. "Why show me this?" he asked. "Because you deserve the truth," she said, and the words exhausted her. "Because I thought we could keep our charities separate from our lives, and I was wrong. Because my husband believes a number in a locket is sentimental. It isn't. What is it?" His voice was a thread pulled tight. "The day Nora came home," Marina said. She set her palm flat on the doorframe. "The day she became ours. We marked the day love arrived, not the day it started somewhere else." "Ethan says that's the cleaner story." Caleb stared at the ledger until the lines doubled. "Came home from where?" Her mouth opened, closed. "A house groans differently when you're about to break it. There were arrangements, discreet ones. There was a woman, a situation no one wanted in the papers. We helped. We were told it was the kindest path." "Kindest to who?" "To Nora," she said quickly, which was an answer but not the answer. "To everyone." He let the words sit. He pictured the notch on the frame, the twin notch on this one, the safe panel behind the stairs, the sticky note he'd once glimpsed because someone had forgotten to stick it back. He pictured the hospital corridor's humming light and the social worker's eyes and the snow that had made his lungs ache. "Ethan will make this go away," Marina said. "If you sign, he'll give you work, a room, a life with fewer drafts." She glanced at his pack. "You won't have to fold your entire existence into canvas anymore." "What do you want me to do?" She took a breath that tasted like apology. "I want you to be safe. I want Nora to be safe. I want—" The truth turned in her mouth like a coin. "I want you to understand that not everything that begins in a hospital bed ends the way the films promise. We did what we were told was right." Her voice dropped. "If we were wrong," he looked at the envelope again. June 29th, 6:29. 6:29, there it was, sitting in ink that hadn't expected to be asked questions. "Come to the cottage," she said. "Please, give us a day. Let me find the rest of this ledger. There's more." "Ethan keeps the hard files upstate." Caleb could hear the city coming awake beyond the glass, garbage trucks shouldering the curb, a bus grinding toward its first stop, a dog complaining to a leash about the cold. The room smelled like starch and the ghost of lavender. He ran his thumb along the edge of the paper, felt the slight burr where the copier had bitten. "If you're still with me, don't blink now. The detail on this frame isn't decoration. It returns dressed as a key when someone thinks you're not looking." He folded the envelope and slid it into his pack. "I'll go," he said. It was both a yes and a gamble, and it tasted like something scorched. Morning tore the night cleanly. Coffee breathed through the kitchen, dark and bitter. Toast clicked up from the toaster with a small, satisfied sound. Nora bounced in wearing a sweater with clouds stitched across the chest. She hugged Caleb's leg like she'd been doing that forever. Ethan watched, eyes narrowed not unkindly, but as if measuring a distance. The drive to Tarrytown unspooled under a sky the color of a dull coin. The Hudson lay to their left, a wide smear of steel under bare trees. The cottage sat at the edge of a hill, white paint fresh against winter, a porch that wrapped around like an arm. Inside, pine floors, a rug that felt like moss underfoot, a fireplace that took its time catching. In the study off the hall, a file cabinet hid under lace curtains, as if lace could make metal pretend to be innocent. Caleb's breath made smoke in the foyer before the heat climbed. "Settle in," Ethan said, dropping a key on the entry table with a clink that sounded like punctuation. "We have a staff meeting in town. We'll be back by 2. Don't go poking around. The last groundskeeper rearranged what didn't need arranging. Marina shot him a look. He'll be fine. They left. Silence opened its wings. Caleb made a show of boiling water for tea he didn't drink, of testing the bed's springs in the small room they'd assigned him, of folding his coat over the chair back. Then he went to the study. He had told himself he would wait. He had told himself the truth would arrive politely if he knocked, but the safe panel in his memory, the sticky note, the ledger's photocopy, the way numbers had chased him through other people's kindness, patience, snapped like a dry twig. The file cabinet's top drawer wasn't locked. Inside lay papers arranged with the same rigid neatness as the Vale dinner table. He flipped. Insurance donations, tax letters with embossed seals. The second drawer stuck, then gave with a small metallic sigh. Inside, a velvet box he didn't open, a stack of photos bound with twine, an envelope stamped Mercy General in tired purple ink, and a narrow silver frame with the same tiny notch on the left. He lifted the envelope. Something slid inside, a form thin as onion skin, his fingers catching its texture the way you catch a memory by the edge before it falls. Behind him, gravel crunched. He set the envelope back and stepped into the hall, heart lifting clean and hard, because outside the window a second car had come up the drive, one he hadn't seen leave the city. The passenger door opened, and a woman in a grey coat climbed out, her scarf the exact color of old photographs. She moved like someone who knew this path intimately, shoulders squared against wind and history. She didn't knock. She let herself in with a key he didn't know existed, shook off the cold, and looked straight at Caleb as if she'd been told to expect him, and as if the thing she carried could either save them or start a fire no water would put out. She took off her gloves carefully, lining the fingers, the small choreography of someone who respects objects because life hasn't. "Elise Park," she said. "Mercy General. I used to run intake on nights when the world came in bleeding. Now I consult for the Vale Foundation. They told me you might be here." Caleb felt the cottage settle around her name. "Why? Because there's a file in this house that doesn't like daylight," she said, and her look carried a tired mercy he recognized from waiting rooms. "And because the way you moved a stroller off a street tells me you won't run from it." She stepped into the study without waiting for permission and went straight to the drawer he'd already dared to open. She didn't reach for the envelope. She reached for the narrow silver frame with the notch on the left and flipped it over. The backing held 2 spring tabs. Elise slid a nail under the notched edge and pressed. The cardboard loosened with a dry sigh. Behind the photo, instead of felt, there was a keyed plate, a small square of brushed metal with a seam. She pressed the notch again, this time against the metal, and the seam lifted like a lid. Inside lay a strip of paper with 3 numbers written in blue. 629. "Mr. Vale doesn't have imagination," she said. "He has patterns." The air tasted like dust and lemon oil from the drawer, a sweetness that clung to the back of the tongue. Caleb's thumb found the burr on the photocopy in his pocket. "What's on the other side of this?" he asked, touching the panel in the wall, the one his memory had filed under wrong. "A lock." Elise nodded at the framed watercolor hanging just off-center behind the desk, a river done in soft blues. "It's not crooked by accident." He lifted the watercolor down. Behind it, a square panel with a digital face blinked patiently. 3 spaces, no letters. He didn't need her nod. He typed 629. The beep that followed was a polite little sound that made his bones feel loud. The panel clicked. The door opened on a shallow cubby smelling faintly of cold metal and old paper, the way a church smells when you open the drawer with the communion cups. Folders slept inside. Not many, the kind that choose their own company. Elise took one and laid it flat, smoothing the cover with her palm. Mercy General, neonatal placement agreements. The manila had gone soft at the corners, as if too many hands had carried it, and none had wanted to admit they had. "I brought a copy of what I could take without being fired," she said, "but this is where the originals live." She opened the folder. The first sheet, a ledger log with the green lines and red margin, the handwriting neat in a way that tried too hard. Mercy General, infant care allocations, June 29th, 7 years ago, underlined twice. Initials, a note, guardianship expedited at donor request. "Elise," Caleb said, his voice rubbing at the word. "Donor, the foundation," she said quietly. Money moves faster than ethics when someone decides it should. The story was simple. An infant in a complicated domestic situation, safer with a vetted family, no extended kin available, Father unknown. I signed intake at 2:17 a.m. That same night, a man came through triage with frostnip and dehydration. Wouldn't give an address. Said he was waiting for someone. Bracelet 629. The hospital corridor rose like steam. A nurse humming off key. A social worker with careful eyes and a form that tried to be kind. He remembered his hands, dirty with snowmelt and machine oil, held useless in his lap, because if he touched anything it would fall apart. I was there, he said, and the admission rearranged the room. Elise slid another page free, not photocopy, original. Birth document with the edges feathered from being handled. Infant, female. Temporary name, June Doe. Marked identifying item, teardrop locket. Adhesive paper insert, blue ink numerals. Mother, withheld. Father, unknown. A smaller line in the margin, pencil, later, possible father, present in triage. Caleb R. Unverified. Contact attempt failed. The pencil line looked like a confession. His throat tightened around a taste of old copper. I didn't leave, he said, hearing how weak it sounded. I was told to wait. Then the morning was there. Then the snow. I know, Elise said, and didn't make him wear shame that didn't fit. I looked for you. I called shelters, asked by description. The system eats last names when it wants to. He touched the paper. It was thin as breath and more dangerous. Across the top, the hospital stamp bled slightly at the curve of the M, like someone had refilled the ink in a hurry. If you notice the missing dot in that purple stamp, hold it where your pulse lives. It will circle back where you don't expect it. Where's the consent? He asked. For placement? She pulled a form with a crispness that said lawyer, petition for emergency guardianship. Applicant, Vale, Ethan S. and Vale, Marina A. Attorney of record, Harrow and Finch. Cited reason, unsafe environment, maternal crisis, risk of abduction by non-custodial party. Signatures marched along the bottom. Doctor, judge, attorney. A section for parent legal guardian showed a signature in a tight, tentative hand. First name only, then a smear. Elise tapped it. She was hemorrhaging. She was scared. She was told she was doing the brave thing. She, the word stepped out before he could stop it, and looked at him with his mother's eyes. Elise's mouth softened. She worked 2 jobs. She carried oranges in her bag because they were cheap and bright. The nurse remembers the smell. She wore a cheap locket that wouldn't keep its paper. She asked for you by first name twice and then stopped, like saying it made it real. The room tilled under him. The radiator clicked on and sent out the dry, sweet heat of houses that have never been cold. He could see the sink in the walk-up he'd had before everything failed. Porcelain chipped. A fruit net with 2 oranges bruising each other in the window. What happened to her? He asked. Elise looked at the envelope again before she answered, as if looking at it could soften what it held. Complications. She survived the night. She didn't survive the week. She lifted her eyes. I'm sorry. The news didn't land. It returned to him from down a hall he hadn't walked in years. He pressed his hand flat on the desk to feel something that wouldn't move. The wood was cool and smelled faintly of wax. Outside, a crow knocked at the cold with its voice. And the baby? She went home with the Vales, Elise said. Quickly. Faster than policy likes. The foundation wrote checks that made the right people think it was mercy and not velocity. Ethan would call it efficiency. Marina would call it love. He thought of Marina at the nightstand, of the way she tucked a scarf end, of how she said the day love arrived. He thought of Nora counting rain on glass and the certainty with which she had claimed his thread. He thought of the 2 photos and their opposite notches, like little compasses deciding true north for you. You want me to tear them apart? He asked. And it wasn't a threat. It was a fear. I want you to know what story you're in before you sign a paper that writes you out of it, Elise said. That's all. And I want them to stop pretending a code is just a date. They built a life around silence and called it kindness. He slid the hospital page closer. A faint coffee ring kissed the lower margin, a pale brown halo like a stain someone had tried to blot. In the right light, the stamp's dot reappeared as a shadow tucked near the judge's name. A misprint unique to Mercy's machine that winter. A little error that could place a document in a month the way tree rings place a year. Evidence lives in those petty things. Tires, Elise said, and in the next breath he heard them too, grated by gravel. The approach not of a staff car but of something heavier. Decision. She moved with economical care, put the folder back exactly, settled the watercolor onto its petty crookedness, slid the notched frame into its performance of innocence. The air changed temperature a degree. The front door opened. Voices, 2, then 3, carried straight down the hall like cold. Ethan's cadence came first, the brisk, polite contempt of a man correcting a calendar. Marina's voice followed, thinner today, catching on wool. Another voice, lower, legal, with the leather creak of a briefcase. Elise looked at Caleb. They'll offer you safety again. Safety with a signature attached. They'll say you're generous if you take it, and cruel if you don't. What do you want me to say? I want you to ask for the original consent form, she said low. The one that never left Mercy. I couldn't take it, but he did. And then I want you to ask why this line exists at all. She touched the margin where the pencil lived. Possible father present in triage. Caleb R. Unverified. Footsteps filled the hall. Shadows crossed the study's threshold. Caleb didn't step back from the desk. He picked up the page and held it the way you hold a photograph of someone you can't afford to crease. Ethan's silhouette stopped. What do you think you're doing? He asked, and the heat behind the politeness could have blistered paint. Caleb turned the paper toward the light, so the misprinted dot and the pencil note stood up and spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I'm reading the line you tried to erase, he said. And there, in the margin, next to father's name, someone had written his first and last carefully, then drawn a single line through it that wasn't strong enough to make it disappear. Ethan didn't step inside the room. He filled the doorway, Winter still clinging to his coat. This is inappropriate, he said. Those are private papers. Private doesn't mean buried, Caleb answered. Where's the original consent from Mercy? The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Reed, even if such a document existed, you have no standing to... Marina moved past both men. She didn't touch Caleb's arm, but she stood close enough that he felt the heat she carried from the car. Show him, she said to Ethan. The words cost her something. He could hear the price in the quiet after. Ethan's eyes went to the watercolor. The pause was half a second, but a half-second told the truth. Finally, he loosened his tie as if it had begun to argue with him, pressed the panel, and opened the small safe. He took out a thin folder with the careful contempt of a man handling something he disliked but paid for. Paper whispered. On top lay the consent. Original stock, not a copy. The purple Mercy stamp blared at the dome of the M. The misprinted dot, a small bruise. A signature in a wavering hand. First name, then the beginning of a last. Crossed once, not erased. Caleb read it twice. The floor steadied under him on the second pass. A date, a time, the margin note in pencil. Possible father present, Caleb R. Unverified. He could see himself on that bench, the plastic bracelet gnawing at his skin. The nurse who hummed because the only other sounds were fear and the electricity of machines. His name in the margin looked like a man knocking on a door he didn't believe would open. Ethan exhaled through his nose. We acted within the law. Elise, behind them, kept her voice neutral. You acted within power. Marina pressed her thumb to the paper without smudging it. We told ourselves we were saving a child from chaos, she said. We were. We also built a story so neat it squeaked. She lifted her eyes to Caleb. What do you want? He didn't have a speech. He had a shape of longing that had learned to survive on crumbs. He knew with a clarity that hurt that he would not take Nora from the place where her laugh lived now, from the arms that knew her weight in the dark. He also knew he couldn't sign a paper that made his own name a mistake. I want a different number in that locket, he said. I want the truth somewhere she can touch when she needs it. I want my name written where someone tried to erase it. I want a test, and I want a plan that doesn't turn a child into a settlement. The lawyer opened his mouth. Ethan lifted a finger, and, to Caleb's surprise, the lawyer closed it again. A test. Fine, Ethan said. But you will not use this to extract Ethan, Marina said. The word was a thread she refused to let him cut. Stop counting money out loud. Silence pressed its palms to the room. The furnace hummed on. Snow brushed the window in slow, dry fingers. If something tugged just behind your ribs, hold it steady. The way she chooses her next sentence changes the angle of the house. Marina looked at Elise. Will you witness? She asked. Will you file whatever needs filing so this doesn't depend on anyone's mood? Elise nodded once. I'll call a judge I trust. Ethan looked at the consent again, then at the watercolor, then at the ceiling like it might send him a better script. You would burn us, he said to Caleb, more accusation than question. I would not burn her, Caleb said, and the her could only mean Nora. I'll stand where I can see her from now on, with or without your permission. I'd prefer with. Marina turned to the lawyer. Draft an addendum recognizing biological paternity upon confirmation. Petition the court for an open adoption arrangement. Guardianship stays, but access is formalized, not begged. The lawyer blinked. This is highly irregular. So were we, Marina said. Write it. Ethan rubbed his eyes with his thumb and forefinger, as if an equation had gone stubborn. If we do this, it doesn't leave this room until the court says so. It already left the room, Marina said, and her voice didn't tremble. It's been haunting our pictures for 7 years. She picked up the notched silver frame from the desk and, with a small, decisive motion, pulled the backing. The keyed plate clicked. She slid out the hidden strip of paper with 6-29. She set it on the desk next to the consent and the mercy stamp with its bruise dot. We made this a code because we were afraid of words, she said. No more. The test happened faster than Caleb had imagined tests happen for men like him. Elise made calls that made other calls. A nurse arrived who treated him like a person with a pulse and a history. A swab brushed the inside of his cheek with the gentleness of someone handling a relic. Ethan signed something briskly, jaw set. Marina brewed tea that tasted faintly of wood smoke and honey. Nora, kept upstairs with a cartoon and a loaf of banana bread as distraction, padded down at one point to ask why everyone's voices were so soft. Because the house is listening, Marina said, and she kissed Nora's hair. They waited. Afternoon folded itself into the long blue of winter evening. The Hudson went from steel to ink. Somewhere in the village, a siren rose and lowered itself again like a polite apology. When the call came, Elise put it on speaker. The voice on the other end reported probabilities and markers and confidence intervals. The number at the end wasn't a number you argued with. No one spoke. Something loosened in Caleb's chest that he hadn't known to fight. He looked at Nora's sweater, the little clouds stitched with an imprecise hand. He thought of the oranges drying on a radiator in a walk-up gone years ago, of a nurse humming off-key because music fills the spaces where fear would otherwise spill. Ethan said finally, smaller. All right. Marina covered her mouth and then didn't, because she didn't want to hide. Nora will know, she said. Not today. Not as a scandal, as a story two adults tell her together when the ground is kind. Caleb nodded. His hands trembled and then remembered how to be still. I'm here, he said. I'll be here. The lawyer gathered his papers with the brisk respect of a man who has seen worse negotiations lose all the oxygen in a room. Elise took photos of signatures beside dates, her pen sure. Ethan put the silver frame back on the desk without restoring its secret, as if the absence itself were finally allowed to show. Night shook out its dark. They ate soup from heavy bowls that kept the heat. The smell of rosemary traveled the hall. The fire's wood popped, resin sweet. Nora fell asleep on the couch, the locket a small moon against her throat. Caleb watched the rise and fall of her breath and felt both the ache of years he didn't get and the astonishment of a minute he did. After the dishes, Marina opened the locket at the table. One side stays, she said, meaning 6/29, the day love arrived. She slid a fresh circle of paper into her palm. What should the other be? Caleb thought of hospital clocks and stamped bracelets and the pencil margin that had refused to disappear. 2:17, he said. The minute someone wrote my name where a machine tried to eat it. She wrote the time in small, careful digits. The ink beaded, then sank. She let it dry and pressed it into place. When the locket clicked shut, the sound had the odd finality of a door deciding it belongs on its hinges. Outside, the snow came on again, a sift of light that made the porch look like a page about to be written on. Caleb found an orange in the bowl on the counter, bright, cheap, miraculous, and began to peel it with the practiced care of someone who has learned to keep sweetness intact. He laid the rinds on the cottage radiator, little suns warming over iron. The room filled with that old scent, citrus and heat, and something faintly caramelized. Marina's eyes closed for a second and then opened on the same breath. Ethan stood in the doorway and didn't leave. Caleb took the night watch in a chair by the window, the kind of wakefulness that isn't worry so much as guard. He could hear the house settle into its bones, could see his own reflection ghosted in the glass beside the snow. When Nora stirred and reached for the chain at her throat, he was close enough to see the new digits glint once before her hand fell back into sleep. He didn't know what would be asked of him next. Courtrooms, school lobbies, holidays negotiated with maps and good faith. He knew only that the door inside him that had been stuck for so long had begun to turn, and behind it was a room with a chair, a window, and a little girl learning the weight of two truths. If you carried this all the way, tell me one word so I know we're still in the same room. Mercy.